And I'd like to start that by talking about the project failure rate. That might seem an odd way to start. And to look at failure, first of all, I want to think about the definition of success. So we're going to start with the flip side of that. And success is defined in the project world as producing planned deliverables within budget and on time. And that does include approved changes, but it doesn't include a general free-for-all.
SWB audio capture not registered.
We get some fairly frightening news. So this chart shows the overall IT project failure rate. But which way round is it? Unfortunately, we have got about a 2-to-1 failure to success rate. And that project failure rate is costing a huge amount of money and human resources. In the US alone, it costs approximately 150 billion US dollars per year in failures. So a small increase in success rate is undoubtedly worth the effort. Imagine this 70% failure in other environments. Would you want to go to a surgeon with a 70% failure rate? I'm now going to move this specifically into CRM and ERP project failure rate. And that is where I have spent most of my professional life. And I have set up a poll that is asking what you believe the failure rate for these projects is. So perhaps one of the backstage people could help by displaying that poll. I'm not sure how I do it through this.
Hi, Jill. So the
SWB audio capture
right
not registered.
If they would submit their polls to the right.
Okay, so can we get people to access the poll about the failure rate? If not, I'll just move on without it. Okay, I think we'll give up on the polls. To put you out of your misery, in the CRM and ERP space, the failure rate is even bigger. We're now up to about 85% of perceived project failure rate. And I'd like you to remember that word perceived. There are many, many reasons for this project failure and plenty of places you can read about that. And I don't want to go into it here. But I'd like to just tell you a story of a colleague that I worked with a couple of decades ago who told me, and I can well believe based on the reading and work that I've done since, that many organizations need to deploy CRM or ERP or one of those similar solutions 3 times. The first 2 on average count as dummy runs to enable you to get the 3rd one right. So given that, you can start to see where some of this failure rate comes from. There are 5 main reasons why we have this project failure rate. And I'm going to zip through those fairly quickly. Now, the first of those is the definition of failure. In the CRM and ERP project
SWB audio capture not registered.
Deemed to have failed. but the reasons for the project failure bear little or no resemblance to the reason that the project was initiated in the first place. And I feel that this image really sums that up, because is this a failure? Obviously, whether or not this construction is a failure does depend on what the brief that was given initially. If the brief was just to build a concrete and steel structure in the middle of this body of water, I think it would be pretty reasonable to say that the team have succeeded. However, looking at the image, it is almost certainly not what the brief was, not least of which because why would anyone engage a company to do what is essentially an ugly sculpture? This lack of guidance or lack of aims of a project reminds me of Alice when she met the Cheshire Cat. And Alice asks the Cheshire Cat where she should go. And because she is unable to say where she wants to go to, or even that she doesn't care where she's going to, the Cheshire Cat understandably tells her that it really doesn't matter which way she goes. And we then take that quote a little bit further, that you will definitely get somewhere if you walk long enough. And I think that is so similar to so many of the
SWB audio capture, not registered,
that I have seen in my nearly 30 years of working in this space. The biggest reason for project failure or perceived project failure is quite simply that the users refuse to use the system. That may happen because the users don't see any reason for switching from their old way to the new solution. Or perhaps in the user's opinion, the new system just takes too long, or it is too complex. Whatever the reason that the users are giving for preferring to work in their old way, overall, that will lead to a project failure, because if we haven't got all the right users using the system and using it largely, at least largely correctly, we will not get any of the information roll-up, consolidation and reporting, which is likely to have been part of the business case for deploying CRM in the first place. So now, in this particular hypothetical example, not only have we got a failure from the user's perspective because it doesn't work, it doesn't help them with their job, we've now also got a failure higher up the company because the reporting, the shared information, the dashboards, whatever it might be, aren't working because the users are not using it properly. So why does all this failure happen? Well, the first reason, I think,
SWB
is
audio
how
capture,
those
not
projects
registered.
are sold. Vendors need their solution to appeal. And one of the common ways that they make sure that their solution appeals is they make it sound very simple, or at least easier than perhaps it is. Purchasers don't know what they don't know. But even allowing for the fact that the experts who come in should know this, they allow the customer to be in charge. They let the customer always be right. And consequently, we find ourselves in a real dog-eat-dog world. And when we add to all of that the tender process, and a lot of these projects are purchased by the organization going out to tender. And the tender process really is weak for this sort of project because it allows the organization to ask the wrong questions of their prospective suppliers and therefore get the wrong answers. And based on all of that erroneous information, they then make the wrong decision. The next reason that I think a lot of these projects fail is the project leadership. And the leadership tends to be chosen either between the IT, who might be an external supplier, or business people, and they will always be internal.
SWB audio capture
when
not
the
registered.
Project leadership is purely in the IT department or the IT team, we run the risk of the project as a whole becoming fundamentally a playground where technical decisions are based not on business need, but on what the team know or what they would like to learn or what they're familiar with or something like that. Certainly not good pragmatic decisions. If we let the project leadership sit with purely in the business, we can run the risk of it becoming a yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir, where wishes are granted without an understanding of the technology, without acknowledging where the low-hanging fruit are with whatever technology has been selected, and therefore things are agreed to that maybe are technically extremely difficult, technically doomed to failure, but they've been signed off by somebody that didn't understand the technology and sending us down that road to failure. The next thing that I want to highlight, and I know that this is contentious, is the Agile project methodology. Now, don't get me wrong, Agile is an awesome methodology when it is used correctly. However, it is often used as a technique to get that sale over the line, and it is sold
SWB audio capture
so
not
that they
registered.
can have anything. And it then proceeds with a, we'll show you what we've got, you can make suggestions to changes, we'll implement those changes, and then we'll show you again. Repeat that ad nauseam. I have seen many, many projects that have failed when the reason is this so-called Agile methodology. And we can be pretty sure that there is no methodology in there. It is really whatever you like, say whatever you like. And when that is allowed, what we have got is, of course, not Agile, but a fragile project methodology. And in almost all of the failed projects that I've been involved in rescuing, this fragile methodology is a key part. I'd now like to look at another of the underlying reasons, and that is the difference between software development and the implementation of a pre-existing product. The vast majority of CRM and ERP projects take an existing technology, whether that's Dynamics 365, where I've played for much of the last 2 decades, or another Microsoft product, or an Oracle product or Salesforce or NetSuite, there's over 400 products that call themselves CRM, and probably a similar number that call themselves ERP.
SWB audio capture,
Most
not
of the
registered.
projects take one of those and implement it with some changes to meet a particular business's needs. When you are implementing an existing product rather than developing something from scratch, there are some key differences. And I'm going to run through these. So typically, a development project where we're building a product completely from scratch that we're then going to sell to a relatively large market, they are typically larger projects, whereas implementation, they're only for one end organization, possibly a very small number, but frequently one. So they're overall smaller. The focus of those projects is different. So when we're doing an implementation project, we are aiming to meet the needs of one specific organization. Whereas when we're developing a project, what we have to deliver needs to be more general. I'm not saying it will please everyone all the time. With software development, our starting point is a blank page. Whereas with implementation, at risk of stating the obvious, our starting point is an existing application. And this one is probably the most important, that the degree of rigor in development is usually significantly higher than when it's an implementation project. So across all of these,
SWB audio capture, not registered.
People don't know what they don't know. They are looking to an implementer to guide them, and frighteningly often that is not what they get. They get somebody who is selling, sell. They get people who are really not very good at translating requirements into end usable software. So now we come on to UAT, and what is it? As I'm sure all of you know, it is user acceptance testing. And user acceptance testing requires real users to test and accept that the application delivers as it was scoped to deliver. And there's a lot of key words in that sentence. UAT certainly isn't and shouldn't be, although frighteningly often is, an opportunity for new requirements. UAT also is not training. This should not be where users learn how to do their job with the new application. UAT has a strict definition where we are testing that what we're delivering or what has been delivered meets the requirements as specified of the users. So I'm now going to look at my 7 essential steps to successful user acceptance testing. So successful user acceptance testing is what you see
SWB audio capture, not registered.
But as with all icebergs, there is a lot more below the water than you can see above the water. Successful UAT begins well before the actual testing. It sits on a foundation of a lot of previous parts of the project. And those previous parts are training, other testing, data migration, development, solution design, scoping, and all of those are then held together by the timeline. So I'm just going to quickly run through the importance of each of those phases of the project. Now, scoping is the biggest one, and frighteningly often it's the one that doesn't happen. Scoping is where we define that this implementation or this upgrade is going to deliver A, B, C. From that, of course, comes our testing, our user acceptance testing, and our end user. The next step is solution design. And when solution design goes wrong, it is usually where the technology has not been used to its best potential. And that often happens through ignorance, that we're having decisions taken by people who don't know the software.
SWB audio capture not registered.
Well, development, it sort of goes without saying, if development isn't done well, it is going to be almost impossible to achieve successful UAT. Data migration, or bringing in the data that the users expect in the system. It is amazing to me, at any rate, how often people say, no, we'll leave all the data behind, the users can rekey it. After all, it's not very good. I was helping a client about 3 years ago, and they did a mail out from their newly implemented CRM solution. And the first time they did this, they got a very large number of return to senders of these lumpy mail outs that they did. And the reason that that happened was that the data was so poor. So based on that, they scrubbed all of that data. They didn't do anything to actually fix it, and they said that the users could start again from scratch. There is also a lot of other testing that really needs to happen before you get to user acceptance testing. So all of your unit testing, integration testing, stress testing, and a number of other aspects of testing need to be done and successfully done before user acceptance testing. Otherwise, you cannot possibly achieve successful user acceptance testing. And the top option, the top one, is
SWB
training.
audio capture
I'm
not
talking
registered.
here about end user training. This is training of the selected users who are doing the user acceptance testing, so that they know what they're testing and how they are supposed to do that testing. I have been in organizations who've deployed CRM and they think UAT is just sending the users into the room and saying, okay, get on with it. Do you like it? Yes, no. And of course, if the users don't like it, it's deemed to have failed. So now look at the essential steps to successful user acceptance testing. What do you need to do? Step one is begin with the end in mind. And the end, of course, is successful user acceptance testing. So that needs to be front and center in your mind when you are planning successful user acceptance testing. Part of that, of course, is to make sure that you don't embark on user acceptance testing if some of those other steps have not successfully been completed. And there's a large number of those steps that I mentioned earlier. If they have not been done, essentially you are being handed a poison chalice and you cannot possibly achieve successful user acceptance testing. The next thing to make
SWB
sure
audio capture
is
not
that
registered.
the users know what they are testing and that what they are testing has been documented, so they have got what is often called a script to follow. This is how you make sure that it's not just do the users like what you've delivered. This goes back, of course, to scope, and the user acceptance testing is confirming or not that what we were asked to deliver, what was scoped at the beginning, and whether that was beginning of a whole project or beginning of a sprint in a more truly agile project, really doesn't matter. But what were we asked to deliver? Have we delivered that? And make sure that that information is passed to the testers. The next piece is make sure that we test the normal and the exception processes. So what I use for this is the idea of testing a credit card system, where even though 95% of the transactions that your credit card system need to handle will be successful, they are probably only 20% or less of what you need to test. You still need to test that your process can handle the card that doesn't have enough funds on it, the card that has been reported as stolen, the card that is damaged, and many, many others. So they're the exception processes.
SWB audio capture not registered.
Into the scripts that we mentioned a moment ago. And the final point is make sure that your UAT is structured. It is absolutely not a free-for-all. So that is the overall to how do you ensure successful user acceptance testing. And it cannot be considered in isolation. Remember that your successful user acceptance testing is that small piece of the iceberg that sits above the water, but the real success comes from all of the other ice that is below the waterline. If you would like to get my checklist of successful UAT, please email me. And I will now hand back to our main presenter to move us on to the next presentation.
Thank you, Jill, for that very interesting presentation. We've got a few minutes for a quick Q&A session. If we can just about 3 minutes left. So if you see in the discuss
so your clock's
panel,
different to mine, but that's fine. I'm not arguing. I'm more than happy to take questions.
So we've got one question here: is how QA team can best support the UAT testing process?
What are you meaning by QA, please, in that particular?
I think
SWB audio capture not registered.
Yes, but what is QA in that context?
Okay, I quality assurance. I'm guessing.
Okay. It does come down to their overall roles, and I'm honestly not sure for that answer. I would argue maybe that the quality assurance people want to be involved all the way up the iceberg and make sure that those other 7 stages are done properly. So we've now got a question about who should perform user acceptance testing. It does need to be end users, but not any old end users that are just, you don't look to be very busy, get over into that room and do some testing. They need to be selected users, and they should receive the training that I mentioned so that they know what they're testing and how to test. So that training is very different to the end user training, which we really can't even start to consider until we've got sign off on our product, which really means successful completing of user acceptance testing.
So Gill, we are running a bit close to the line. So Gill will be taking part in the panel session later. So we'll save these questions for her, and we'll get her to address them again when we join again for the panel session. So once again, Gill, on behalf of Unicom, thank you so much for
SWB audio capture, not registered.
Your participation in the panel.
Thank you.
So guys, I'm going to move us across to the next session. Our next session is Transformation to Safe Agile Software Development Framework.